it's come up. Okay, great, fantastic. Okay, so just to introduce myself, I'm president of Sydney Christian Bushwalkers. I'm a member of Sutherland Bushwalkers, and I keep up to date the content of the Bushwalking New South Wales website. And I've been bushwalking for over 20 years. Before that, I was a rambler in the UK during most of the 90s. I research and write local history projects, and I've won the Bayside Council Ron Rathbone History Award 3 times. So, how to get lost? I rather like this little thing from Paddy Palin. Yes, so just a little reading there. Keep your proposed route a profound secret. Leave the map and compass at home. How about getting everybody lost? And if that's not good enough for you, perhaps you might like to do a little bit of wandering. Okay, so there was Paddy being a little bit tongue-in-cheek back there in around 1937. So here's my little definition: unable to find your way and not knowing where you are. That's my definition. So the first thing you might want to ask is, well, why am I interested in New South Wales? And there's a pretty simple reason for that. When I started looking at the historic accounts in Trove newspapers from 1788 to the 1950s, there were 56,000 news reports of people getting lost in the bush. And when I filtered that down to just New South Wales, it came down to 19,000 reports. So even though, of course, many of those accounts were multiple accounts of the same story, that's still a lot of people getting lost in the bush. And clearly, I did not read 19,000 reports. So in the book, I'm not talking about explorers like Burke and Wills and Leichhardt. I'm just talking about ordinary people lost in the New South Wales over the last 2 centuries. And many of the stories are historical, but some of them are more contemporary, and some you might even recall being discussed in the newspapers. Now, I should mention my little book does not include any pictures, but I think a presentation is always much more interesting if we have pictures. So I've been fussing around from historic photos from Trove and other sources. So I guess the theme of the book is really that you need to plan your walk, carry the right gear, and get the right skills so that you don't get lost, or if you do, that you have the skills and the knowledge to be able to get yourself unlost or at least rescued with a fairly minimum amount of fuss. So I start by looking at the beginnings of the colony, and it's no surprise that many of the 18th and 19th century convicts, Marines, and the early settlers were lost. It was a very strange and foreign land, and although it's quite possible to get lost in the UK in certain areas, it does not in any way relate to the unremitting wilderness that surrounded the early colonists. Now, one resident moaned in 1839, "How do our sensibilities now shudder at the recital of, oh, horrible fate of wandering alone, lost, desolate in the interminable bush." So there were no maps, of course, in the early days, and it took the explorers quite a few years to work out the lie of the land in the area completely surrounding Sydney, and let alone the Blue Mountains or the wilds of up the Illawarra and Hunter regions. So one of the first mentions of a soldier becoming lost in the bush occurred in 1791. And after meandering around the landscape for some time, the unnamed Marine was fortunate enough to come across a group of Aborigines, and he was relieved to recognise one of the groups. So he approached him to ask for assistance, and the men escorted him home without incident. So here's my next picture. Now, of course, whenever a convict disappeared, there was the presumption that he or she had absconded, and then occasionally a very unfortunate soul became lost, and they wandered around dazed for many days. They became dehydrated, they lost weight because there was no food. They struggled to find their way back to civilization, and when they get back, they're hauled before the magistrate, they're accused of absconding, and this was the lot of a farm labourer in Liverpool in 1826, and he had his farming supervisor report his loss to the police. Now, he spent 8 days, rather harrowing days, lost and starving in the bush, before a neighbour discovered him and drove him back home in a horse and cart. Now, his relief, of course, at being saved was probably a little bit tempered by the actions of the unsympathetic supervisor, because he promptly had him arrested and hauled up for the magistrate. But of course, the magistrate did see some common sense and he soon released him. New hands, of course, were at particular risk because they had no understanding of the perils of the new country. And in 1838, John Blunt, a farm labourer, was sentenced to 7 years transportation. He was assigned to a work gang accommodated here at Hyde Park Barracks. Now, the gang would leave the confines of the barracks early every morning, undertake their work duties, and then John had been in the colony less than a month when the supervisor discovered he hadn't returned to barracks at night. Now, of course, the first assumption was that he'd absconded, or, of course, alternatively, had he been murdered or had he met with a fatal accident? Now, there was a lot of speculation amongst both supervisors and fellow convicts, but John had actually just simply become lost, and he, after being separated from the work gang. Now, he was eventually found in a state of starvation and exhaustion. He was suffering from exposure, as you would expect, but he died after a brief spell in the colony's primitive hospital, which, of course, today is the Parliament House and the Mint building. Now, if you're going to get yourself lost, who's going to save you? So this is the unlikely story of a man who was rescued by a cat. So Daryl Pierce Shute was employed at a timber mill about 35 kilometres northeast of Tumut, and he was working in a forestry job. You probably would expect that he would be fairly competent navigating the surrounding timber getting area, but you'd be wrong. One summer Sunday afternoon in 1952, he strolled off into the bush, lost his way, and desperate to return to the mill, he wandered around for 5 days, still had not a clue where he was and whether even anyone was looking for him or if he would ever be found. Suddenly, he spotted a strange and very unexpected sight, a cat in distress, and it was caught in a rabbit trap. So Daryl rescued the cat, and it limped away, and then Daryl thought, well, maybe the cat knows where he's going. So he followed the cat, and the cat led to a dirt road, and then the dirt road reached a farmhouse, and hooray, he was saved. The farmer took him off to Tumut Hospital to recover. So we know that Daryl recovered, but we have no idea whether the poor cat was recovered as well. Now, of course, you're more likely to be rescued by the SES Bush Search and Rescue than by a cat. So in the book, I also talk about the incident that led to Paddy Palin founding the Search and Rescue Unit of the Federation of Bushwalking Clubs in late 1936. Now, the catalyst was an incident in October that year when 4 walkers became lost traversing the Gross Valley from Blackheath in the Blue Mountains right along the way to Richmond. Well, they never got that far. The Birmingham brothers and their 2 friends set off on Saturday afternoon. They were in high spirits. They were going on a 30-kilometre October long weekend hike. They were armed with 2 ukuleles, an axe, blankets, and provisions of, I read, 10 pounds of chops, 3 loaves of bread, 2 pounds of butter, and a few sardines and things. So now you know what to pack on a weekend hike, folks. Now, these young men, of course, had no bushwalking experience, although one friend had been a jackaroo in Queensland for some time, about a year or so. So the route they planned was actually a 60-kilometre trip, and of course, they rather underestimated the length of the trip and also the clarity of the trail. And I get the impression from the description they gave, they probably didn't have much of an adequate map. They had taken a compass, but when the press interviewed the boys' mother, she told reporters she doubted they had any idea if they knew how to use it. So once they left the Blue Gum Forest, the going was pretty tough. It was time-consuming. And because of the slow progress, they were mistakenly convinced that they were quite close to their destination. They kept thinking that Richmond was just around the corner, which, of course, it was not. And later, John Birmingham would claim a little bit, arrogantly, I thought, to the press, oh, he wasn't really lost, he was just delayed. Well, added to their difficulties, of course, it rained, they were wet through, they didn't have dry matches for a fire, their food was running out, and they were in a pretty bad state, actually. They were pretty hungry, pretty exhausted, and all bruised. Their clothes were all ripped, and there were lots of sharp branches and clinging vines, and they climbed over falling trees and they hacked their way through the dense undergrowth. Now, if that wasn't problem enough, It was the hottest October day in 8 years. Sydney reached 35 degrees Celsius. There were bushfires burning in the vicinity, and that area was quite smoky, which of course impeded the aerial searches. And their 3-day hike actually turned into an 8-day nightmare. Now, when they became overdue, the police commenced a search. So they had a couple of planes and they were searching from the skies, but the tree cover was pretty dense. And for the most part, it was pretty impossible to see anyone on the ground. So at one point, the plane's pilot got very excited. He spotted 4 walkers on the ground. And so he dropped a message asking them to draw a mark on the ground to say whether they were the lost hikers. Well, he was a bit disappointed with the answer. It was no, because it was in fact Paddy Palin and his friends, and they'd entered the valley from Falcon Bridge. They were searching for the missing men. They just decided by themselves they would do that. So the prior evening, they'd had a meeting with Paddy and representatives of the various Federation clubs, and they agreed to offer their services in the search. So there were 11 club members catching the Mudgee Mail train from Central, arrived at Falcon Bridge after midnight, hiked 2 hours, then set up camp for the night. And when dawn came, they separated into 2 parties and went 2 directions in the Gross Valley. They traversed the valley and they discovered a cave where the lost walkers had inscribed their names. And it was not long after this that another plane spotted them, and they lit a little smoky fire to attract its attention. They dropped a message and the plane said that the boys had been found. So, of course, it was no easy exit for all those intrepid Federation bushwalkers. And they spent the following morning hiking out to Bilpin for lunch, hitchhiked by car to Kurrajong, and then caught the train home to Sydney. So a pretty exhausting day for them or two. While the end result for the families was a fairly positive one, the outcome, of course, for the bushwalkers in general was even better, because as a consequence, Paddy and his friends decided to set up a subgroup of the Federation, the Bushwalkers Search and Rescue Unit, and it comprised initially of Paddy and half a dozen other walkers, and member clubs would provide the names of people who were prepared to go out and conduct a bush search. So when Federation was notified that somebody was lost, Paddy would then ring everybody, and then they would ring their club members, and they would all get together. So you can imagine, in an era before mobile phones and good communications, not even everybody had a home phone. So it would take quite a few hours to organise something like that. So perhaps the younger walkers might find that a little astonishing. And of course, over the years, the role of the group did change, as did the training requirements and the government regulations. Lots of issues these days of liability, and of course the affiliation of the rescue squad. So today they operate independently from Bushwalking New South Wales, and they assist the state police, which is now the organisation which is authorised to initiate search. Now, the police are in an unenviable position when it comes to deciding enough is enough and a search should be abandoned. And of course, sometimes the decision to cease searching is later shown to be premature. You may remember the report of the 19-year-old Scottish hiker Jamie Neal. He was lost for 12 days in the Blue Mountains in the winter of 2009. Now, he did walk out of the bush after the search had been cancelled. However, the question on everybody's minds was, why didn't he die of exposure? Now, this case did become quite controversial as the public debated whether he really had been lost or whether it was just some sort of publicity stunt. And it seemed impossible to survive in freezing temperatures, Katoomba, and the dead of winter, or just were the Scots hardier than the Aussies realised? Maybe. So whatever the truth of Jamie Neal's story, there is some precedent for being lost for several days in the middle of winter in the Blue Mountains and surviving to tell his tale. So my final story for today, but of course not the book, David Reardon was employed by Shepherd's Bakery, which was located at Dargans Creek, One Tree Hill. Now, this is today known as Mount Victoria. So one chilly morning in June of 1868, Shepherd asked David and his colleague Charles to go out into the bush and search for a lost pig, which had escaped its pen overnight. Probably not the usual job you'd ask your baker to do. Anyway, the pair set off into the bush for about 1.5 k's, and then David decided, well, he had sponge cakes in the oven. He really couldn't be afforded to be wandering around in the bush looking for a pig. They might burn the cakes. So he said, I'm going back. You keep looking for the pig. And, you know, he wasn't far away. He thought he'd be back home within 20 minutes or so, took a wrong turn, got completely confused, and he had no idea which way to go. After 3 days and nights with no food, he stumbled across a cattle track, and he followed that until it petered out into nothing. It was snowing, and of course we know that intense cold can play tricks on the mind, confuse your thought, and he fell to the ground in a stupor. He was hallucinating. He thought he was back in Sydney. Well, eventually, though, he came to his senses a little bit, and it suddenly struck him the surrounding trees had been stripped of bark. Now, if there were bark strippers in the area, there must have been workmen, and workmen must have carried everything away in a cart. So he had a look, and guess what? There were horse and cart tracks. So if he followed the cart tracks, yes, he would find his way out. So the next day, the cart tracks led to a paddock and 6 men working by the roadside, and they said, well, he was on the Mudgee Road. He was about 10 k's from the zigzag railway, which was being constructed at that time. And so he kept walking, eventually met a young boy and asked the boy for some help. The kid said, well, you know, are you ill? And when he explained who he was and what had happened, it suddenly dawned on me. He said, good Lord, are you Shepherd's Baker? They gave over the search for you last night. So they'd stopped searching. So they took David home by horse and cart, and a local resident did comment, it seems a perfect wonder that the man has been able to hold out so long as he has done, especially during the long and cold nights of last week. He is a thin, spare man and seems, to look at him, but ill-calculated to bear up against such hardships as he must have gone. So what strikes you with a lot of the stories is that people really held on for quite extended periods, pretty cold and wet and tired and hungry and pretty frantic, really. So some good stories of people who just had a lot of perseverance. Some of them died, some of them survived. Howard Reardon survived 6 days and 5 nights in sub-zero temperatures. Was a little short of a miracle. And as for the pig, well, who knows if that was found. Sponge cake, doubt anybody was worried about sponge cake that day. So historical cases of becoming lost in the bush were often caused by lack of road infrastructure, primitive communication methods, and coupled with the lack of availability of maps. So most of the modern scenarios in the book, though, were caused by overestimation of their abilities, inattention to their surroundings, inadequate knowledge of bush skills, and quite often a lack of preparation for a bushwalk, and even just a plain lack of common sense. In other words, getting lost was an avoidable circumstance. So too many people in these stories didn't have a compass, they didn't have a map, they didn't have a GPS. If they had them, they wouldn't even know how to use them. And the severity of the situation was pretty often compounded by an accident or an illness. And when there was injured, often the party was too small to have someone to go walk out and get help. So in such circumstances, of course, a personal locator beacon would have been a saving of loss of life, eliminated thousands of dollars of search and rescue efforts by the police and the SES Bush Search and Rescue volunteers. And unlike historical walkers, today's hikers really do have pretty ready access to innovative safety technology, multiple sources of safety information. So sometimes getting lost is unavoidable in wild country, but learning navigation skills and carrying the right equipment, of course, does make it possible to find the way back unharmed. So in conclusion, I have a nice final word from Paddy Cullen again. And a nice little picture there of Canangra Gorge, 1939 bushwalker. And so there you are. According to Paddy, being lost is essentially a state of mind. A bushwalker is never lost until his mind goes a blank. He could be miles off his course in a terrain unknown to him, yet he's not lost while he knows what to do, whether to follow a creek, or make for a ridge, or even head in the general direction of a road. So there you go. Any questions?
Thank you, Leonie. Yes, does anyone have any questions for Leonie? Comments?
I haven't actually printed this book. I've done it as an ebook, and would be interested, you can send me an email at that address and send me your money, and I will send you an attachment in a file that's suitable for Kindle, iBooks, or even a PDF if you don't have a reader.
Kirsten, we can send that out to everyone who came tonight.
So I might unshare
that link.
Yeah, so Kirsten knows my email address.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Thank you.
Oh, any questions?
Oh, well, has anybody, can anyone give us an experience of being lost? It was a good outcome. Anyone like to venture?
Must be a good outcome if they're here tonight.
That's right. That's right. It's a good outcome if they're here tonight. But if they weren't here, then obviously it may have been an adverse outcome. So, does anyone like to put their name, step up and fess up to being lost? What the situation was and why. Kirsten.
I actually didn't get lost. I was on a walk where 3 ladies got lost, and we really don't know how we lost them because they walked up a hill and everybody else walked like down the hill to the creek. But these ladies, they just disappeared. And the 3 of them wandered off because they were talking. So they lost track of everybody else, but ended up at the bottom of the creek. So somehow they got around everybody who was on the creek without going through the creek. I don't know how it happened, but we were about to call the police. Well, we actually did call the police. We retraced our steps back to the start of the walk and still hadn't found them. So called the police, but next thing you know, they turned up and apologized because they'd just been chatting. Too busy chatting. So that was a very easy, very brief account of being lost.
Very easy to get lost. My brother is not a bushwalker, but many years ago he was going for a little drive around the Royal National Park, and he decided it was a lovely sunny day. He stopped the car and he walked up the hill to have a look at the view. Thought it was pretty obvious. When he walked back down, he walked on the wrong side down the hill, ended up at the creek, and fortunately he had the common sense to follow the creek. He walked, well, it's not very easy walk because it's not really a track, but he walked along the creek until he ended up at Audley, and then he hitched a lift home. But we had no idea he'd even gone into the park. If he hadn't have done that, we'd have been, wondering for days where he'd gone. So it's so easy to do if you're not prepared.
Yeah.
And that's local, you tend to think of, it's just my local park. I can't get lost there. Of course you can, very easily.
Hi, it's Alison here. I've got a little story. Just recently I was hiking and I was up in the main range in Brisbane, out from Brisbane in Queensland, and came across a family who had been lost for several hours. They had food and water. There was just a couple and their 10-year-old son. They were absolutely completely lost. They would have spent days up there if we hadn't have found them. And they were using one of the phone apps, but as you might know, if you don't actually download the maps when you don't have reception, you no longer have a base map to compare your track to. So that was one mistake they made. And secondly, the particular app was had very poor resolution. So it really didn't give them, it was like plus or minus 100 meters. So, they were kind of heading around in circles. They didn't know where they were going anyway. They didn't have a track on that map anyway. So that was mistake number 2. So when we found them, they were pretty healthy and happy and quite fit. So we actually took them to our destination, which was where they were going to as well. So we went there. But before we went, we said, well, if you do come with us, we're going to be walking back in the dark. So my hiking companion and I both had enough head torches between us so each of the party had one as well. So we had, we ended up walking back in the dark. And when we got back, the key message was join a bushwalking club. You know, you can go on these walks, you can learn where to go, you can learn the tracks, you can learn how to hike safely. And also, as we were walking, we were kind of teaching them little, not like a big show off, but just little signs here and there that might help them to read the landscape a little as well. So yeah, that was one of my recent experiences. I'd share that.
Well, that's a great story. They were very fortunate they bumped into you guys then. But you often find that. I mean, I've been on bushwalks. I was in the Royal once, and I met somebody. They had an Explore Australia. And you know how big that book was? It's a tome. It's like a phone book size. And the map of the Royal was 2 inches square. Now they were going on a bushwalk with a map. They told me. That's unbelievable. Not surprising people get lost.
Well, no, it's not surprising, and be interesting to know. We do want more people out in the bush, and Les is going to be talking with us shortly about connecting with nature. But we obviously, parallel to that, is we want people out there, but we also want people who've got a bit of awareness about where they are and where they're supposed to be going, and maybe that's something we as an organisation could do a little bit more on, not just the clubs, but also the non-club people, about helping them enjoy the bush but not get lost. So thank you very much, Leonie, for that. That was most interesting. I'm glad they were all fairly happy stories, but obviously it doesn't always happen that way. But anyway, that was nice to hear. And we're continuing on the theme of getting out there. We've got Les Higgins, Dr. Les Higgins, who's going to talk to us about his book about connecting with nature. And I think it was a common theme with during lockdown and so forth, where everyone was sort of had restricted on what they could get up to and restricted in terms of the range they could go out. But it was a lot of people were talking about connecting, going out into the bush is a good sort of mental health thing, good for your mental health to get out in the bush and so forth. So that was a message that was promoted by a number of people, particularly sort of public health officials and so forth. So Les has written this book, Connect with Nature, one of the best things you can do for yourself, others, and planet Earth. So Les, we hand it over to you to tell us what it is about this one of these best things we can do. Thank you.
Just asking Les to unmute.
Start again, sorry. Thank you, David, and thank you, Kirsten, for the invitation to talk about the book. This is going to be a futile exercise because I suspect that the image is going to be reversed, is it not?
No, it's not reversed.
It's not reversed. Well, I'm only brandishing this because one of the hurdles one crosses in trying to get a book into print is to find an effective cover. Don't you believe it? Books are judged by their covers these days, and the saga behind this cover is a story in itself. You won't hear it tonight, but I'll just tell you about it. But the curious thing was the final image was lodged away in my own files after we looked at dozens and dozens from all sorts of databases. And it's of two rather special little kitties connecting with nature in a very everyday, natural sort of way. And that captures in part one of the sub-messages that I try to put across in the book. Well, now this is the first time actually I've talked about the book, to an audience at least. So I hope I'm right in assuming that you'll be interested to learn how I came to write it and what it's about. Now, I'll address these questions in turn, but first I should explain the kind of connection that the book focuses on. I emphasize focuses. It acknowledges other valuable and useful forms of way of connecting with nature, but I'm particularly interested, and the book as I say, draws a particular attention to a very deep mental and emotional and spiritual connection with nature, with the natural world, which I and others call nature connectedness. Now, I have such a relationship, and I suspect many of you do too. So you may relate to my personal account of what nature connectedness is in terms of my own life experiences. I am a deeply nature connected person. That means I relate to nature as a friend. I respond to living things and the natural environments they inhabit with affection, respect, concern, interest, and of course, concern for their well-being. I enjoy almost everything about nature, especially being surrounded by it. Woody Allen once quipped, "I'm at two with nature, but that's not me. I feel at one with the natural world because nature is an important part of who I am." I see myself, and it's an important part of how I see myself and how the world sees me. I need regular doses of it, just as I need love, nourishment, exercise, rest, happiness, and a sense of purpose in life. And as I said or hinted, caring for nature, the natural environment, is hugely important to me. Now, my nature connectedness has broadened and built me as a person. It steered my life in unexpected and highly beneficial directions, and furnished me with a host of precious memories. The relationship is in fact a key strand of my life. Without it, my life would have been much less interesting, satisfying, and fulfilling. Now, my experience of nature connectedness, coupled with what science has taught me about it, convinces me that forging the relationship is one of the best things we can do for ourselves, others, and planet Earth, as the subtitle of the book gives expression. Or the subtitle of the book gives expression to that conviction, as do the book's first sentences. And let me just read those to you. A connection with nature is one of the most desirable and valuable relationships we can have. It is a relationship that is good for us and good for nature. I know this from personal experience and from the evidence of thousands of studies. For us, it is a source of happiness, well-being, and health. For nature, it is critical because nature connectedness motivates us to take care of the natural environment. And if ever there was a time when nature needed our care, it is now. But it was not my conviction alone that motivated me to write the book. The 2018 conference of the 196 member nations of the United Nations Convention on Biodiversity issued this call to action. The time is now. The evidence is clear. One of the most important things that any of us can do for ourselves, those we love, people throughout the world, and the living systems that support us all, is to connect with nature. Now, that's certainly a big call, but it is backed by a wealth of evidence. Much of this evidence tells us that we actually need nature, just as we need food, water, and a close relationship with others. It's an essential ingredient of life, in other words. Without water, death is inevitable. Without close and supportive social ties, physical and mental health are in jeopardy. Without nature connectedness, any chance of living our best life is missed. Living without the companionship of nature is rather like playing a piano, but ignoring the black keys, or having a sailing boat and never using the spinnaker. A feature of the call that really stands out for me is the link it makes between nature connectedness and caring for the environment. There are many contemporary voices advocating connecting with nature to enhance human happiness, health, and well-being. The call makes connecting with nature something we also need to be doing, for the environment. Now, the convention proposes that fostering nature connectedness should be part of humanity's efforts to address the twin crises of climate change and loss of biodiversity. For example, the call to action comes with this statement: connecting with nature provides the foundation for resilient, healthy ecosystems to thrive and remain for generations to come. In the last chapter of the book, I explain that the potential success of the strategy lies in its power to change people's environmental values and to strengthen their mental and emotional awareness of the natural world. In so doing, it creates what I call an environmental conscience. An environmental conscience takes full account of the rights and needs of nature and consistently assesses proposed actions in terms of their likely environmental impact. In the book, I argue that nature connectedness and an environmental conscience go together. This makes fostering nature connectedness an environmental strategy for our time. And this is a little part of what I say about that in the book. Fostering nature connectedness alone is not going to solve the planet's environmental problems or secure humanity's future. The problems are far too urgent and complex for that to be possible. But it deserves to be an integral part of the endeavour. Albert Einstein said that no problem can be solved by the same consciousness that caused it. Nature connectedness changes the consciousness that governs our ways of relating to nature. And environmental conscience is a powerful expression of that change. It also enables us to work lovingly, respectfully, and empathetically with nature, satisfying many of our basic needs while taking care of nature at the same time. Now to the question, why did I come to write the book? Well, I've already given a very strong indication of the rationale that drove me. As I admit in the first chapters, I was not always a nature-connected person. I had plenty of contacts with nature growing up, but I didn't feel closely connected with it. In my early adult life, I occasionally spent time in nature hanging out with friends, especially girls, and for recreational purposes. Nature was where I had fun, but that was about it. Now, my journey to nature connectedness began when I was in my 30s. I was married with 2 young daughters and living a very busy and sometimes pressured life. Both my wife and I realized that we needed a recreational activity we could enjoy as a family. A friend suggested that we join the National Parks Association. We decided to follow this suggestion, and as the saying goes, the rest is history. From the start, we enjoyed our bushwalking immensely, and it soon led on to other things, including trekking in Nepal. Now, my nature-connected journey was really 2 journeys. The first was the physical or outer journey, comprising the physical activities that I undertook. The second was the inner journey involving my mind and heart. From day walks in the bush, the activities comprising my out journey gradually expanded to include camping and backpacking, canyoning, abseiling and rock climbing. Story very like many of your own in many cases. The family trek left me with a passion for trekking, which took me back to the Himalaya regularly through the 1980s and 90s, mainly as an honorary leader for Ozventure, which you may be aware was the first commercial trekking company established in Australia. During the same period, I was also involved in running adult bushwalking and camping courses. My bushwalking club, Yarrawood, had its origin in these courses, and I'm pleased to say that 2022 marks the 40th anniversary of the club. Now, by any reckoning, I've had a long and extraordinarily rich association with nature. It was inevitable that I would become a deeply nature-connected person, and I was certainly that in 2002, the year I retired from my job as a university teacher and researcher. I knew that I had a deep relationship with nature, even though I did not use the term nature connectedness to label it. At that time, this term did not have the currency and meaning it has today. I was also aware that my experience was not special or unique. While teaching the courses of Walking with Yarrawood and leading trips, I had seen that nature does good things to and for all sorts of people, and regardless, really, of where they are on their journey. But I was still to discover just how astonishingly good it can be. Making that discovery was the next and probably will turn out to be the final chapter in the story of my friendship with nature. There I was in 2002, newly retired from my university position and still passionately engaged, almost as a second career, in nature activities. I'd recently co-written A Day in the Bush, a natural history and bushwalking guidebook centred on the Sydney region. Selecting walks to feature in the book was challenging because there were so many to choose from. The task prompted me to reflect on my own bushwalking experiences, what they were, where I had had them, and how they'd affected me. This stock take made me more conscious of what nature had contributed to my life, its emotional impact especially. Memories of times and places associated with intense pleasure, awe, wonder, and fulfillment flooded to the surface. I had these bushwalking memories in my mind when I turned my thoughts to finding a retirement project. Emerging of my academic and leisure interests gave me the idea of studying what science had to say about nature's effect on people. I had no notion initially just how vast, absorbing, and rewarding that project would be, nor did I anticipate how monumentally it would enlarge my understanding of what nature connectedness had done and continues to do for me and what it can do for everyone. From the outset, the project began to transform my understanding and appreciation of what had happened to me on my nature connectedness journey. It was like someone finding more in a work of art by being helped to view it more deeply by someone literate in such matters. I was viewing my nature experiences through new lenses. I found myself reliving and enjoying many of the experiences afresh. I first began sharing these discoveries in a blog, Our Green Genes. And I started floating the idea of using the same material for a book about 10 years ago. And what finally motivated me to proceed was the call to action from the Convention on Biological Diversity. So what's the book about? What does it offer? Connect with Nature is 2 books in one. First, it's a practical guidebook intended to help people to weave nature into their lives in a way that suits them, regardless of age, background, abilities, and circumstances. It's a book for such a wide audience because nature is so accessible. We do not have to look far to find it. Now, we bushwalkers love nature in its wild and remote forms, but nature can be as close as the plants in our living room, on our balconies or patios. Even representations of nature in photographs and audio and video recordings can deliver some of the benefits of the real thing. Second, it's a book with a message. And you won't be surprised that message is that connecting with nature is immensely valuable for us individually, for our families, for our communities, and for the natural environment. As a guidebook, it invites people to approach connecting with nature as a journey. It suggests that they begin the journey with appealing and easy to do activities and then proceed at their own pace and on their own terms. Part 1 of the book, the how-to part, shows how this can be done by discussing such things as overcoming barriers to connecting with nature, choosing nature activities that will be rewarding and doable, strategies for engaging deeply with nature, sharing nature experiences, including bushwalking with children, turning to nature in difficult times, and caring for nature. I appreciate Bill Boyd's interpretation of what I've tried to do in part 1. He says, the reader is given permission, along with the tools, to build their own version of their connection with nature. The book, he goes on to say, is a practical guide to the gentle process of regaining our humanity. I rather like that. It's a guide to the gentle process of regaining humanity. It's a great compliment, and I hope it's true. Now, drawing on examples from life, part 2 of the book describes the beneficial and the rewarding good things to be expected from becoming nature connected. Now, these good things include emotions such as aesthetic pleasure, I call it the beauty buzz, awe, wonder, tranquility, all emotions that expand our mental and emotional boundaries, making us smarter, yes, making our brains work better, and even making us kinder. The good things also include relief from stress and mental fatigue, no question. Restored vitality. They provide the building blocks of well-being, such as self-understanding, self-esteem, resilience, and companionship. A moral commitment as well to take care of the natural environment, another of the good things. And enhanced physical and mental health, to which David alluded in introducing the talk. Because in relation to that, there has been an explosion of evidence demonstrating an association between a connection with nature and the reduced risk of premature deaths and of developing a range of physical diseases and mental disorders. Some of this evidence comes from population studies involving 1 million or more people. And for children, the good things include experiences that are essential for their optimal physical, mental, and emotional and social development. There are 2 chapters in the book discussing the benefits of nature experience for children and how to foster them. The book gives a very strong plug to free play in nature. Although evidence-based, the book draws liberally on people's life experiences. The chapter on turning to nature in difficult times, for example, begins with this account. When news of the terrorist attack on the World Trade Center in New York saturated the American media on September 11, 2001, Richard Louv bundled his then 30-year-old son into their Volkswagen van and traveled to a favorite nature haunt on the beautiful Owens River, which runs through the Sierra Mountains of California. This is his account of the experience. We fled from the great pain that would lead to greater pain and drove the 6 hours from San Diego to the Owens and parked next to the current that washed out all the sound and all the fury. That night, inside the van, we flipped down the table and ate granola bars and drank hot chocolate and watched the window screens grow opaque with a late hatch of insects. And all the next day and the day after that, we cut the electrical cord to the outside world and found a sense of equilibrium. As you might expect, I draw on my own experiences, and this is one I use to illustrate that extraordinary emotion, which we're only now beginning to understand fully, the emotion of awe.
Tonight's episode of the...
I still vividly recall an episode. Of awe I experienced over 40 years ago. It happened at the end of a long day of uphill trekking in Nepal, in central Nepal. I was walking a little apart from my companions, weary and looking forward to reaching the campsite. I arrived at a small saddle, the final hurdle of the day, and there in front of me was the immense eastern face of Mount Dhaulagiri, rising the best part of 6,000 meters from the valley of the Kali Gandaki River. I was overwhelmed, and I remember exclaiming, "It can't be true." Time stopped for me, and I was totally caught up in the scene. I have no idea how long I remained there, utterly transfixed. I still can get goosebumps recalling it. When I finally made my way to the camp, I had completely forgotten my fatigue and my mood had lifted. Somehow the world seemed a better place. Now, the book is not meant to be read from beginning to end. It recognises that readers will have different needs and interests according to where they are on their nature connectedness journey. A person new to nature activities, for example, might be drawn to the chapters in part 1 about getting started and choosing nature activities. But a parent might land first on the chapter about connecting with nature a family affair. The book's expanded table of contents and its index are provided to make it easy to navigate the book. Now, all chapters in the book can be read independently, although one or two chapters, the one on health, for example, draws on the content of previous chapters to some extent. But even these chapters are largely freestanding. Now, my plans and aspirations for the book are not completely fulfilled by its publication. For one thing, I believe that an evidence-based book such as Connect with Nature needs to come with after-sales service, by which users of the book are given access to updates and supplementary information. To this end, the book comes with, as part of a package that includes a website and a companion blog. And as a final comment, my vision for the book goes beyond selling it and keeping it up to date. I've always liked John Burroughs' comment, if I were to name the three most precious resources of life, I should say books, friends, and nature. And the greatest of these and the least and most constant and always at hand is nature. My hope is that the book will help people avail themselves of this resource. But I don't want the book to be a once-only static document, but an ongoing and dynamic tool. In my most ambitious dreams, I see the book and the website and the book companion blog as providing a platform of interaction, perhaps even of community and network formation. And now, time for the commercial. The book can be purchased through bookshops and online. Alternatively, you can purchase a copy from me at 20% discount. Just go to the book's website, www.connectwithnatureguide.com. That's connect with nature, lowercase guide, connectwithnatureguide.com, and message me through the contact page. Don't go to the buy the book page, go to the contact page. We'll do this this transaction together. So if you're at all interested in reading more about connecting with nature, that's a way to do it without a big outlay. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Les. Kirsten, I think Kirsten's already put those details up in the chat box. So that's to find out about getting a copy of Les's book. That was terrific, Les. Thank you. I'm actually going to ask you a question about, do you talk in the book about the loss, particularly people who live in urban areas, the loss of access to what I call the night sky? Because I think one of the things that people have lost a sense of awe and wonder about looking up into the sky and seeing the Milky Way and all the galaxies and meteors and planets and all that stuff. And I think if you live in a big city, you might be able to see half a dozen stars. You might be lucky, to see one or two constellations. But I think in that broad definition of nature, I think the loss of access to the night sky is also, I think, something that's very sad.
Yes. Thanks very much, David. Yes, the book does indeed. It has to, because there is a strong message, which I think I indicated, a strong message in the book, that nature is everywhere and that we can connect with nature literally within the house, home, on the balcony of our apartments, in our domestic gardens, along our tree-lined streets, and so on. And in the chapter in which I identify literally hundreds of activities, I have a whole section on doing it in everyday life. And among the suggestions is the need to enjoy the sunrise, the sunset, the night sky, the dew, the little things, because people, I think, often have this image that nature is remote. It's difficult to access and even alien. And that's one of the things we have to break down, the concept that nature is alien. It's ironic that people think that, because as recently as 2 weeks ago, we had the extraordinarily long-awaited study that demonstrated that that humans do indeed have a genetically driven desire to affiliate with nature. 50%, just under 50% of our attraction to nature is the work of genes. Correspondingly, slightly over 50% is a function of environment. And of course, environment can either foster our connectedness, or it can let it wither, or it can even obstruct it. And you were making the point about what we can do as bushwalking clubs. The vision, if only I was younger, I'd love to, my vision of what I'm doing is, you know, introducing people to bushwalking, helping to run a bushwalking club is to try and let people make this monumental discovery that connecting with nature is going to vastly enrich their lives, and by no means by providing better health, as you were indicating. So to get back to your question, yes, it is addressed in a very practical way. And I also should mention that a chapter on awe and wonder capitalizes on work that has only just come out in the last 5 or 6 years on the incredible nature of these two emotions. And of course, nature is replete with opportunities for these emotions to be evoked. Just fantastic. You get the impression that I'm a bit enthusiastic about nature, by the way. Yeah.
Over to you. Anyone got a question or a comment for Les? Yes, Neal.
Yeah, I've got 9 grandchildren, 2 of which have mild autism. Now, one of the things I'm doing with them, now they're old enough, 7 and 8, I take them out for a walk in the bush. Now, I'm not taking them anywhere where I'm trying to, you know, kill them with by trekking, but I just get them out in the bush, and there's a complete change comes over them, actually. It's like a happiness. They become very relaxed, whereas quite often they're very tense. And it's something that could be used more for autistic children. Not all of them, not suitable for all of them, depends on the degree. But it's just something, whereas a lot of clubs and groups say, oh, they're autistic. No, we can't take them. But so I just take these 2 out myself, and we just go and find a nice place, and we sit and we throw pebbles into a creek. We look at tadpoles, you know, and like you were saying, at night,
oh, yes.
At night we sit and watch the sun go down, and then we're not too far in the bush, so we can't get out easily and this sort of thing. And then we just sit and listen. And as you know, once the night falls on the bush, the sounds change completely. And we just listen to the sounds. Now, when I take the kids home to their parents, they say, I don't know what you did to them. They're just completely different for the next couple of days. So obviously nature gets into them somehow. And I hope that I'm helping them and that they will break this autism stigma where, you know, everything's ordered and everything's got to be done on time and they've got to take medication here. And, you know, yeah, it's just an interesting observation on my part, something I've actually been doing. Yeah, thank you.
Neal, well, thank you. That really made my night. A couple of things, I'll try to remember them. You're in very distinguished company. You probably know of Oliver Sachs, the author and neurologist,
yep,
who wasn't afraid to tackle some of the most difficult neurologically damaged people. And he tells a story of a friend that had Tourette's syndrome, which manifested in upwards of 1,000 tics, verbal ejaculations a day, totally disruptive of normal life. Took him out into the desert and the symptoms disappeared. Now, he wasn't talking about autism, but it's not hard to see the parallels. Likewise, way back, Francis Crowe, University of Chicago, took kids with ADHD into natural environments, observed the effects, and you've got similar to what you've been observing. That's my first point. Second point, Neal, could I prevail upon you to do something, please? Would you go to the website? Would you just contact me by sending an email to me? I would, if you would permit me, I'd love to hear more of your story. And with, of course, complete protection of privacy, it's a story that amplifies what I'm saying in the book. And it's the sort of human interest story that will help and affect others. Now, if you don't want to do that, of course, you'll tell me. But
no, I'll do that for you, no problem. One of the things that is interesting to do with the children is journaling.
Oh, brilliant.
And
brilliant, yeah.
It's not so much writing about their experiences. It's about the experience. It's about how you feel about the experience. Exactly. And also get them to do little drawings, you know, this sort of thing. So what I'll do is, after I've stopped talking and given it back to you, I'll change my background picture and I'll show you a little bird that a 7-year-old drew recently. It's I couldn't do that when I was his age, I'm sure. And this is a little boy who's got mild autism.
Brilliant, wonderful, Neal. Please do that.
Thank you.
No, it's been my pleasure.
We'll just wait for Neal to put that background drawing up. Has anyone else got a question?
Could I find it?
Yep, me, Diane. Sorry, no photo.
Yep.
It wasn't so much as a question as I was just wondering, Les, if you were aware of the forest and bush preschools that are now becoming popular.
Thank you. Yes, the forest school movement, Scandinavia, I'd say pretty safely that it began there. It's taking off. I wouldn't say it's rampaging through the education system, but lots of people are paying attention because we're now getting, again, very strong evidence, which I just overview. I'm not heavy-handed in going through it, but in the chapter on children, there's really a remarkable listing of the range of benefits that come to children, including academic progression. I mean, we can recognize that taking them into nature does good things for their physical and sensory development, but it's clear from the evidence that it has powerful impact on them emotionally, as Neal was indicating, and indeed on their
stupid thing.
Yeah. Anyway, thanks. Yes, Diane. It's I'm glad you mentioned that. Yeah.
Neal's back with his picture.
So go on.
Unfortunately, Zoom keeps centering me, not the picture. Hang on, I'll stand away.
Is that a 7-year-old?
That's a 7-year-old.
That is remarkable.
Knocks the socks off me.
I don't wonder. That is absolutely amazing.
He's actually signed it.
In another life, I was a child educational psychologist. And I can tell you, mate, you've got every right to be very impressed. That is something again.
Yeah. You can't see it, but just below my shoulder there, oh God. The Zoom keeps putting me in the centre. No matter what I do, it puts me in the centre.
Oh, you're not a bad looking bloke. You're all right. Yeah.
Oh God, spare me. I feel like 1,000 years old some mornings.
Join the club.
Yeah, but I don't do ropes and climbing anymore.
Oh, really? You surprised me.
No, that was years ago in the army, but no, not anymore. Anyway, there's a little picture, but I'll get back to you. Okay.
Please do, Neal. That's just wonderful. And if anyone else has stories that they can, I'm most interested in collecting stories of nature experiences that have mattered to people. So look, it'd just be wonderful if you would get to the website and share them.
And the website is connectwithnatureguide.com.
Thank you, Kirsten. That's right. Yeah.
A little ad.
David here again, Les. Do you see any, I mean, the way, obviously, the reality is that most people are living and will in the future be living in large urban areas. Do you see there's any recognition within governments and big, large companies that are involved in planning and building cities and expand, and so forth? Do you see any evidence that they might be getting this idea about connecting with nature? Is that something that's resonating with them, or is it still something that it's still a threshold we have to cross to get those sort of institutions and companies, etc., on board with this?
Okay. Interestingly, much of this research that I synthesize in the book and channel is not a formal literature review. That's not what people are looking for. It's a synthesis, and then I channel the essence of it through the book. Much of the research was driven initially by this remarkable proposition that came from Edward O. Wilson, who died just on Boxing Day last year, his proposition of biophilia. And he was the first, a biologist of world renown, to advance the theory that we do indeed have an innate interest in and attraction to nature. Right. Architects, interestingly, and urban planners were among the first to take up this idea, not medicos, not psychologists, but architects and urban planners. And they came up with the concept of biophilic design. So I begin to answer your question by saying that there has been a movement in those fields to find ways of bringing urban environments and nature together. Now, that now has given rise to a number of movements, such as the urban forest movement. And numbers of the councils in our big cities, including Sydney here, have embraced this concept. It promotes the idea of using public space that may not otherwise be used, and domestic space, and for planting and for tree function. You can also see evidence of a stirring in even quite recent utterances about the time is now to start getting our developers recognize the importance of integrating green space into some of these great developments. So there is a stirring, but it's still coming up against the profit motive. It's still coming up against the corporate mindset that all what matters is economic progress. We have a long way yet to go before we get people shifting to a new consciousness. And I think part of the reason why we need to get onto this, get the ball really rolling as far as nature connectors is concerned, is that until we get the general population beginning to swing in behind this, we won't get the press on governments and on corporations. But there is some evidence that it's beginning to happen.